"We didn't order for your son," my sister said, handing him a bread basket while her kids ate $100 steaks and dessert. My dad added, "You should have packed him something." I just smiled and said, "Noted." When the waiter came back, I stood up and announced I've spent most of my adult life cleaning up after my sister's messes, financial, emotional, even babysitting her kids, while she went on her last-minute emergency getaways. I did it without much thanks, always hearing the same line from our parents. "She's going through a lot." As if I wasn't, Jill's life has always been one dramatic mess after another. But somehow she still manages to land softly because someone else is always catching her. Usually me and our parents. They act like she's this fragile, helpless creature who can't be held accountable for anything. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The Grandview Yacht Club sits at the very edge of the harbor, the kind of place where the membership dues cost more than most people's cars, and the sunset feels like something you have to pay extra to witness. The air smells of salt, water, and expensive perfume, a thick, cloying mix that always makes my throat tight. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. My father, Christopher, was finally retiring after 40 years, in corporate law, a career he wore like armor. My mother, Patricia, had been planning this dinner for 6 months, curating every detail from the floral centerpieces to the seating chart. And that chart was the first sign that tonight wasn't just about celebration. It was about hierarchy. The main table was set for 6. My parents at the head naturally. My sister Brittany and her latest boyfriend on one side. My Uncle William and his wife on the other. And then a few feet away, tucked near the service entrance and the swinging kitchen doors, was a small round table set for 2, me and my 6-year-old son Jacob. I tried to ignore the slight. I tried to tell myself it was just logistics, that the main table was full. But then the food started arriving. For the main table, a parade of luxury. Seafood towers dripping with ice and condensation oysters, freshly shucked bottles of vintage wine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The waiters moved with the silent efficiency of well-oiled machines, placing plates of filet mignon and lobster tails in front of my parents and sister. Brittany, who calls herself a lifestyle influencer but mostly influences my bank account balance to drop, was already snapping photos, her phone hovering over the food, capturing the perfect angle of abundance. And then there was our table. Jacob sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap, watching the feast unfold just a few feet away. He was wearing his best shirt, the little blue button-down he loved, because it made him look like a grown-up. He hadn't complained when we were seated apart. He hadn't complained when the waiters breezed past us with the appetizers. But when the main courses arrived at the big table and nothing came to ours, he looked up at me, his eyes wide and confused. "Mom," he whispered, "is our food coming soon? I'm really hungry." I waved a waiter down, forcing a polite smile. "Excuse me, I think you missed our order. My son and I would like to see a menu." The waiter looked uncomfortable, his gaze darting toward my father. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was told the tasting menu was for the main table only. Your father said you weren't included in the head count for the dinner service." My stomach dropped. I looked over at the main table. My father was slicing into his steak, not even looking in our direction. My mother was laughing at something, Brittany said, her wine glass catching the dying light of the sundae. I stood up and walked over to them. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice low. "Jacob is hungry. Why weren't we included in the order?" My father didn't stop eating. He chewed, slowly swallowed, and then finally looked at me with eyes that were cold and flat. "It's a fixed-price menu, Emily. $500 a head. We didn't think it was necessary to spend that kind of money on a 6-year-old who won't appreciate the truffle oil. Besides, things are tight right now with the retirement transition." Things were tight. This from the man wearing a watch worth $15,000. This from the family sitting in a private club eating gold-flecked dessert. Brittany chimed in then, her mouth full of lobster. "Just give him some bread, Em. He loves bread." She grabbed the bread basket from the center of the table, the free bread basket, and thrust it toward me. "Here, problem solved." Under the table, I saw her hand slip a piece of prime steak to her Pomeranian Coco, who was sitting in a designer carrier at her feet. The dog got steak. My son got bread. I stood there holding the basket of cold rolls, and something inside me finally snapped. But it wasn't a loud snap. It wasn't a scream or a cry. It was the quiet, terrifying sound of a foundation cracking. I looked at my son, who was watching me with hopeful eyes, waiting for his mother to fix this to protect him. And then I looked at my family. My sister feeding a dog better than her nephew. My parents who saw my son not as a person, but as an unnecessary expense. For years I had swallowed these indignities. I had told myself that this was just how they were, that if I was patient enough, good enough, generous enough, they would eventually love us the way they loved Brittany. It's funny how the brain protects you. It normalizes the abnormal until you forget what healthy looks like. When you grow up in a freezer, you don't realize you're shivering. You just think that's what weather is. You think the numbness in your fingers and the chattering of your teeth are just part of being alive? You learn to put on extra layers to huddle in on yourself to make yourself small so the cold can't find as much surface area to bite. I had spent 29 years making myself small. I had spent 29 years apologizing for taking up space, for having needs, for existing. I had convinced myself that their cruelty was just a different kind of love, a tough love, a love that demanded I earn my keep. But looking at Jacob holding a bread roll like it was a consolation prize for being born, the temperature suddenly changed. I stepped out of the freezer, and for the first time in my life, I felt the heat. It was burning me up from the inside out. Not anger. Anger is messy. Anger is loud. This was rage. Cold, clear, absolute rage. I smiled at my sister. I smiled at my father. Noted, I said, and I walked back to my table. I sat down across from Jacob and put the bread basket aside. He looked at me worried. Mom, are you okay? I reached across the table and took his hand. I'm better than okay, baby. I'm awake. I signaled the waiter again. This time I didn't wave politely. I raised my hand with the authority of someone who was done asking for permission. When he arrived looking nervous, I didn't whisper. I spoke clearly, loudly, my voice carrying over the clinking silverware and polite chatter of the yacht club terrace. I'd like to place an order, I said. The waiter glanced at my father again, but I snapped my fingers to bring his attention back to me. Eyes on me, please. We're not ordering from the set menu. We're ordering à la carte. And we're putting it on the member account. My father's head whipped around. Emily, what do you think you're doing? I ignored him. For my son, I said he'll have the Wagyu ribeye medium rare, the 14-ounce cut, and add the lobster tail. Oh, and a side of the truffle mac and cheese. And for dessert, the chocolate soufflé. Make sure it's the large one. The waiter froze, his pen hovering over his pad. He looked terrified. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her pearls in a gesture that would have been comical if it wasn't so pathetic. Emily, that's a $200 steak. He's 6, I turned to her then. My voice was calm, conversational, deadly. I know, Mom. But since things are so tight, I figured I'd help you out. See, I'm canceling the rest of your course service. I turned back to the waiter. Cancel the vintage Cabernet they ordered for the toast. Cancel the seafood tower refill. Cancel the dessert course for the main table. In fact, cancel everything that hasn't physically left the kitchen yet. My father stood up, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. You can't do that, that's my account. Actually, Dad, I said, meeting his eyes, it's a family account. You added me as an authorized user 3 years ago when you needed me to pick up your dry cleaning and run your errands because you were too busy being important. You never removed me. So technically I can order whatever I want. And right now, I want my son to have a steak. And I want you to watch him eat it. Silence descended on the terrace. The table of bankers next to us had stopped talking. The couple by the railing was staring. My sister looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Uncle William, who had been quietly observing the entire evening, took a sip of his water and hid a smile behind his glass. The waiter looked at my father, then at me. He saw the steel in my spine. He saw that I wasn't the same daughter who had walked in an hour ago. He nodded once. Right away, ma'am. And he walked off toward the kitchen. I sat back in my chair and unfolded my napkin. Jacob looked at me, his eyes wide. Mom, is Grandpa mad? I smiled at him, a real smile this time. It doesn't matter, sweetie. Tonight we feast. And as the waiter brought out the sizzling steak, placing it in front of my son with a flourish usually reserved for royalty, I watched my family. They sat in stunned silence, their own plates suddenly looking less appetizing. They were realizing that the dynamic had shifted. The ATM was out of order. The doormat had grown spikes. And the bill? The bill was finally coming due. The aftermath of the dinner was exactly what you'd expect from people who value appearance over substance. The drive home was quiet, but my phone was not. It vibrated against the console of my car like a trapped insect buzzing with incoming notifications. I didn't look at it. I focused on the road, on the rhythm of the streetlights passing overhead, on the soft breathing of Jacob asleep in the back seat. His belly was full of Wagyu beef and chocolate, and he was dreaming the peaceful dreams of a child who knows he is safe. I wished I could say the same for myself. When I finally pulled into my driveway and carried Jacob to bed, I sat down at my kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of tap water. The silence of my house usually felt lonely. Tonight it felt heavy, pregnant with the realization of what I had just done. I had publicly humiliated my father. I had stolen control from my mother. I had openly defied the family hierarchy. In their world, these were capital offenses. I unlocked my phone. The first text was from Brittany. "You are psychotic. You ruined Dad's night. Everyone is talking about how crazy you acted. Send me $500 for the cancellation fees, or I'm telling everyone you had a mental breakdown." The second was from my mother. "I don't know who you think you are, but you are not the daughter I raised. You embarrassed us in front of the entire club. Fix this. Now." The third was from my father. A simple notification from the bank. Access revoked. He had removed me from the family account before the dessert plates were even cleared. I laughed. A dry, humorless sound in the empty kitchen. They thought this was about money. They thought they could punish me by cutting off access to an account I never used for myself anyway. They didn't understand. I wasn't trying to spend their money. I was trying to show them that I was done spending mine. I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet. I titled it, "The Ransom." For years I had been the safety net, the backup plan, the silent investor in the business of Brittany's life. My parents constantly told me that family helps family. What they meant was that I helped Brittany. Brittany needed a new car because her image as an influencer depended on it. I co-signed the loan. Brittany maxed out her credit cards on a business trip to Tulum. I transferred the balance to my card to save her credit score. Brittany couldn't make rent because her brand deals fell through. I wrote the check. I started typing every transaction, every transfer, every loan that was never repaid. November 2021 rent assistance, $1,200. January 2022 car repair, $850. March 2022 emergency credit card payoff, $4,500. July 2022 bailout for the failed jewelry line launch, $3,000. The list went on and on. I pulled up my bank statements, cross-referencing dates and amounts. The total at the bottom of the column grew larger and larger until it stared back at me, a five-figure indictment of my own stupidity. $18,500. $18,500. That was a down payment on a house. That was a college fund for Jacob. That was a year of freedom. And I had given it away piece by piece, buying a seat at a table where I wasn't even allowed to eat. I realized then what it was. It wasn't charity. It wasn't generosity. It was a ransom. I had been paying a ransom for a hostage, my family's love that was never alive to begin with. I thought if I paid enough, if I saved them enough times, if I was useful enough, they would finally look at me and see a daughter. They would see a sister. But you can't buy what isn't for sale. And you can't save people who don't want to be saved. You can only drown with them. I looked at the total again. $18,500. That money was gone. I knew I would probably never see it again. But I could stop the bleeding. I could stop paying the ransom. I opened my email and composed a new message. Subject: financial independence. To Brittany Mom Dad. CC Uncle William. Effective immediately, I am ceasing all financial support for Brittany. The car loan I co-signed will need to be refinanced in her name within 30 days, or I will contact the lender to discuss options for removal, including voluntary repossession if payments are missed. The credit card balance transfer is due in full. I am no longer the family safety net. If Brittany wants to live an expensive life, she can pay for it herself. Do not contact me asking for money again. I attached the spreadsheet. I attached the bank statements. I hit send. It felt like cutting a wire on a bomb. There was a moment of breathless silence, and then the explosion. My phone lit up instantly. Brittany calling, Mom calling, Dad calling. I didn't answer a single one. I turned my phone off. I walked into Jacob's room and watched him sleep for a minute. his chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of peace. I had spent my whole life trying to be the good girl, the reliable one, the one who fixed things. But tonight I realized that you can't fix a house that's built on a sinkhole. You can only get your furniture out before it swallows you whole. I went back to my room, lay down in the dark, and for the first time in years, I didn't worry about what my family thought of me. I was done paying. The ransom was over. The following days were a masterclass in chaos. My family, clearly unused to facing consequences, spiraled spectacularly. Brittany took to Instagram Live crying about how I had abandoned her during a mental health crisis, conveniently omitting the part where she starved my son. My mother left voicemails that ranged from weeping pleas to cold threats about disinheritance. My father sent legal-sounding emails demanding I pay for the emotional damages caused by my public outburst. I didn't engage. I didn't argue. I forwarded everything to Uncle William. Uncle William wasn't just my uncle. He was a retired judge with a reputation for being fair but ruthless. He had always been the black sheep of my father's side because he refused to play the social climbing game. When I called him the day after the dinner, he listened in silence. When I sent him the spreadsheet and the emails, he called me back within 10 minutes. "Emily," he said, his voice grave, "this isn't just bad parenting. This is financial abuse. And possibly fraud." We met at his home office, a quiet room filled with books and the smell of old paper. He reviewed my documents with a magnifying glass, quite literally. "You co-signed the car loan?" he asked, peering over his spectacles. "Yes. Dad said it would help her build credit. And the credit card balance transfer, Mom said it was a one-time emergency." "Brittany's purse was stolen in Tulum," Uncle William snorted. "Her purse wasn't stolen. I saw the photos. She bought a new one." He helped me draft the formal demand letters. We used legal letterhead. The language was precise, devoid of emotion, and terrifyingly clear. We demanded repayment of the $18,500, giving them 30 days before we filed a civil suit. We notified them that I was removing myself as a co-signer on the car loan, which would trigger an immediate recall of the debt unless they refinanced. We sent copies to their family attorney, a man who I suspected was just as tired of their antics as I was. But the real work, the work that kept me up at night, was the audit. I needed to separate my life from theirs completely. I went through every account, every subscription, every shared password. I changed everything. I requested my credit reports. I froze my credit. I was building a fortress around myself and Jacob. It was during this excavation that I found the key. I was going through a box of old papers my father had stored in my garage years ago for safekeeping. He had always used my house as an overflow storage unit for his hoarding tendencies. Most of it was junk, old tax returns, expired warranties. But at the bottom of a box labeled 2005 to 2010 household, I found a black ledger. It looked like a standard accounting book. I opened it expecting to find business expenses. Instead, I found my name. Emily Braces, $4,500. Emily, piano lessons, $1,200. Emily, prom dress, $300. Emily, college tuition semester 1, $12,000. Every expense, every single dollar spent on me since childhood, was listed under a column titled, "Debt divided by, to be repaid." I flipped the pages, my hands shaking. It went back years. Emily, medical deductible for broken arm, $500. Emily, school field trip, $40. I turned to the section labeled Brittany, Dance Academy investment, Brittany, modeling portfolio gift, Brittany, car gift, Brittany, Europe trip cultural enrichment. There was no debt column for Brittany. There was only investment and gift. I sat on the cold concrete floor of my garage, the ledger heavy in my lap. It wasn't just that they favored her. It was that they had monetized my existence. They had viewed me as a financial liability from the moment I was born, a debt to be collected, while Brittany was an asset to be nurtured. The transactionality of their love wasn't a feeling I had. It was a policy they had written down in ink. I took photos of every page. Then I took the ledger to Uncle William. When he saw it, he didn't say a word. He just closed the book, took off his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Christopher always was a bean counter, he said softly. But this is pathological. Can I use it? I asked. Oh yes, he said, a dark glint in his eye. We can use it. But not in court. In court, this is just sad. In the court of public opinion. In the court of family reputation. This is a nuclear bomb. We didn't have to wait long to use it. 3 days later, my parents showed up at my door. It was a Saturday morning. Jacob was watching cartoons. I saw their car pull up my father's pristine Mercedes, and I felt a surge of old panic. But then I remembered the ledger. I remembered the ransom spreadsheet. I remembered the stake. I opened the door but blocked the entrance. What do you want? My mother looked frazzled. Her hair wasn't perfectly coiffed. My father looked angry, but underneath the anger I saw fear. We need to talk, Emily, my father said. This legal nonsense has to stop. You're tearing this family apart. I'm just balancing the books, Dad, I said. Isn't that what you taught me, financial responsibility? We need you to sign a document, my mother said, cutting to the chase. The bank needs a co-signature for the refinancing on the house. We're doing some restructuring. Restructuring. That was code for we're broke. They needed my credit score. They needed my income verification. They needed the ATM to spit out one last receipt. No, I said. Emily, be reasonable, my father snapped. It's just a signature. It doesn't cost you anything. It costs me my future, I said, and I'm done paying for yours. I reached behind me to the entry table where I had left a photocopy of the ledger. I held it out to them. What is this? My mother asked, taking it. She looked at the page. I saw the recognition in her eyes. I saw the moment she realized what I had found. My father looked over her shoulder and went pale. I found your accounting, Dad, I said. Very thorough. I see you charged me interest on my braces. That's impressive. That was just for record keeping, he stammered. I never intended. To collect, I interrupted. You've been collecting for 29 years. You've been collecting my time, my energy, my money, my self-worth. You've been bleeding me dry to water Brittany's garden. Well, the debt is settled. I pointed to the driveway. I sent copies to Uncle William. And Aunt Sarah. And the cousins. Everyone knows. The ledger is public record now. You wouldn't, my mother whispered. I already did, I said. Get off my property, and don't come back until you have a check for $18,500. They stared at me. For the first time in my life, I saw them not as giants, not as authority figures, but as small, sad people who had built their lives on a foundation of lies. They turned and walked back to their car. They looked old. They looked defeated. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood and listened to the sound of their engine fading away. Jacob wandered into the hallway, holding his favorite stuffed tiger. Mom, who was that? I turned and scooped him up, hugging him tight. Nobody, baby. Just some people who used to know us. Are they coming back? No, I said. They're not. The fallout was quiet but absolute. The family grapevine did its work. The ledger was the final nail. Relatives who had been on the fence, who had urged me to make peace, saw the black and white proof of my parents' cruelty and fell silent. My parents were isolated. Brittany, without her funding source, had to sell her car and move into a smaller apartment. She blocked me on social media, which was the greatest gift she could have given me. I got my money back. Not all of it, but enough. Uncle William helped me negotiate a settlement where they paid me a lump sum to avoid a lawsuit. It wasn't the full $18,500, but it was $12,000. I took that check and I didn't spend it. I didn't buy a new car. I didn't go on a trip. I opened an investment account in Jacob's name. I called it the Freedom Fund. Every month, the money that used to go to Brittany, the loans, the bailouts, the guilt payments, I put into that account. I watched the number grow. It wasn't just money. It was a promise. A promise that my son would never have to buy his way into his own family. A promise that he would never have to pay a ransom for love. I sat on my back porch one evening watching Jacob play in the yard. He was chasing fireflies, his laughter ringing out in the twilight. The air was cool and sweet. I thought about revenge. People always say revenge is a dish best served cold. But they're wrong. Revenge isn't about serving anything to anyone. It's about refusing to eat the poison they served you. It's about building your own table. I looked at my son running free in the grass and I knew I had won. Not because they were miserable, but because we were happy. I sipped my tea. I listened to the silence where their demands used to be. And for the first time in 29 years, I wasn't shivering. The ransom was paid, the hostage was free, and the future was entirely ours. If you've ever had to buy your own peace of mind, share this story. You never know who needs to hear that walking away is an option.